Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into one of the most unexpected and frankly fascinating intersections of modern pop culture and hardcore infrastructure policy. Usually, when we think of global pop stars, we picture sold-out arenas, billions of streams, and maybe a high-profile fashion line or celebrity tequila brand, right? But today, we're exploring how one massive artist is taking a radically different approach. He's taking the exact mechanics of building a global fan base and using them to tackle one of the most notoriously dry, complex, and divisive topics in Washington: energy permitting reform. With the free time that someone who sells out Madison Square Garden would have, he's a climate organizer. That quote perfectly captures the bizarre, amazing juxtaposition we're talking about today. The guy we're focusing on is Adam Met. He's one-third of the multi-platinum band AJR. So we're talking about an artist with over 5 billion streams on Spotify, someone who literally sells out massive arenas worldwide, and yet his chosen side hustle is diving headfirst into the absolute snooze fest that is energy permitting and land use policy. It sounds almost like a joke at first, but as you'll see, this is absolutely not some celebrity vanity project. Because while touring the globe and playing to thousands, Adam was also quietly earning a PhD in sustainable development. He went on to found a nonprofit called Planet Reimagined, and they operate on what's called an action research model. That means they don't just publish academic papers that sit on a dusty shelf, and they aren't just out protesting without a specific policy goal. No, they do deep, calculated research to figure out exactly how to move the needle on hyper-specific energy laws. We're talking about lobbying for incredibly wonky regulatory tools like categorical exclusions.
Section 1. The Pop Star PhD, turning cultural reach into civic action.
To really get his strategy, you have to look at how he analyzes social movements. Adam figured out that the exact same audience-building strategies he used in the music industry apply directly to civic action. It comes down to this core difference. Good storytelling is a nice video, people share it online, they care about it, and then they just go about their day. But effective storytelling literally gets people off the couch to take physical action. Caring simply isn't enough anymore. Adam's philosophy is that massive, global issues like climate change are just too overwhelming. If you tell someone to fix the climate, they're going to experience loss after loss and eventually just burn out. So the real goal? Design campaigns that yield hyperlocal, achievable wins. Give people a taste of actual victory in their own neighborhood, and you keep them engaged for the long haul.
Section 2. Bipartisan permitting reform, finding the overlapping circle in the Venn diagram.
So how do you apply that highly targeted approach to national policy? Well, Adam spent nearly a year roaming the halls of Congress during the Inflation Reduction Act negotiations. And here's the kicker. He didn't go in pitching his own ideas. He spent that year almost exclusively listening to deeply divided lawmakers to find just one singular point of agreement. He took all those notes back to a giant whiteboard to neutrally map out what each side actually wanted. The left wanted carbon reduction, renewable energy deployment, and zero new virgin land disturbed. The right wanted continued revenues for the oil and gas sector, strong property rights, and an all-of-the-above energy approach. And right there in the middle was the perfect overlapping circle: effective land use. This birthed the strategy behind the Co-location Energy Act. It proposes putting new wind and solar projects directly on top of existing oil and gas leases. The right gets a sublease revenue stream from oil and gas land, and the left gets renewable energy without tearing up untouched nature. It's a completely pragmatic approach to land use. To put this opportunity into perspective, think about this number: 18 million. That is the number of acres of pre-disturbed oil and gas leases currently sitting in the United States with high potential for wind or solar. 18 million acres. These lands already have roads, they already have infrastructure. By focusing on these specific areas, we can deploy clean energy so much faster and cheaper, all while completely sidestepping the massive environmental battles that erupt when you try to build on untouched land.
Section 3. The Trojan Horse Strategy, the secret plan for transmission.
Now here is where it gets incredibly strategic. To understand the Trojan horse aspect of this bill, we have to talk about the mechanics of a categorical exclusion, or CADEX for short. Basically, a CADEX is a regulatory tool that allows developers to bypass years of bureaucratic red tape. Instead of starting from scratch with brand new environmental studies, they can just reuse existing environmental data on pre-disturbed land, like an active oil field. It effectively shaves years off the approval process for these solar and wind co-locations. And that brings us to the ultimate goal, the actual Trojan horse of this whole plan. If this bill passes, it sets a bipartisan precedent that says, yes, we agree to use categorical exclusions for renewables on oil and gas land.
Once that precedent exists, you can take that exact same legal framework and apply it to the hardest infrastructure problem in America: transmission. The secret plan is to eventually use this CADEX precedent to fast-track massive grid upgrades and new transmission lines by running them right alongside existing oil and gas pipeline routes. It is a brilliant stepping stone strategy to upgrade the U.S. power grid.
Section 4. The Hyperlocal Playbook. Grassroots Organizing in Colorado Bars.
Of course, a bill doesn't just magically pass because it makes sense on a whiteboard in Washington. It requires a serious ground game. Planet Reimagined used a highly relatable 3-step playbook in Colorado to build community sentiment for something as notoriously boring as permitting reform. Step 1. They literally went into local bars and restaurants, bought people beers, and just educated them. No clipboards, no asking for signatures, just sharing basic info. Step 2. They tested incredibly simple messaging. They weren't throwing around stats about carbon parts per million. They just pointed and asked, "Hey, see those oil fields over there? Would you mind if we put solar panels on them?" And when people naturally agreed, they moved to step 3, asking for physical civic action, having those locals write to their representatives in support of the legislation. It is grassroots organizing stripped down to its most human, effective elements.
Section 5. Reframing AI data centers. Shifting the paradigm on energy hogs. Applying that exact kind of local sentiment strategy is becoming critically important for another massive infrastructure issue popping up everywhere: AI data centers. We're seeing intense community pushback across the country regarding the extreme water use, land footprint, and sheer energy demand of these facilities. But our source material presents a really fascinating reframe. The current view in a lot of towns is that data centers are just a drain on community resources. They take up land, they're noisy, and they stress the grid. But the alternative perspective, the opportunity view, is that AI is here to stay and it's going to grow. So instead of purely fighting them, communities should leverage these massive tech companies to fund local needs, make them invest heavily in the community to earn their spot. Plus, the AI housed in these centers is currently being used to identify hundreds of thousands of megawatts of stranded capacity on our existing power grid. So if framed correctly, data centers don't have to be a parasite. They can be a massive vehicle for local investment and grid optimization.
Section 6. The power of local. Why your local officials matter most.
Whether we're talking about zoning for data centers, co-locating solar panels, or laying transmission lines, massive national energy goals actually live or die right at the hyper-local level. When you really break it down, the President of the United States does not decide where a data center goes in your town. Your local county and city officials handle that zoning. You want electric school buses so kids aren't breathing diesel exhaust? That is your local school board. What about neighborhood-wide geothermal heating, better waste management, or EV mandates for Uber and Lyft? That's your local city council and taxi commission. The issues that most directly impact our daily lives are decided by mayors, commissioners, and local boards, which are, ironically, the races that usually see incredibly low voter turnout. Which brings us to the single most actionable takeaway from this entire explainer. 5 minutes a month. Literally, that is all it takes. Pick one hyperlocal issue that you actually care about, find out who your local representative is, and spend 5 minutes a month emailing them, calling them, or even just messaging them on Instagram. Because local officials hear from so few of their actual constituents, a single, persistent, polite voice carries massive, outsized weight. I want to leave you with this final thought. Right now, local officials are essentially forced to extrapolate the entire will of their community from the handful of people who actually bother to show up to a town hall or send an email. If you're feeling exhausted by doom scrolling through global issues that feel utterly impossible to fix, the real antidote is right in your own backyard. The question is, are you going to be one of the people who actually shows up? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it gives you a whole new way to think about how real change actually happens.